Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the Postgame podcast from another Timberwolves win. The Wolves beat the Mavs by 18, bouncing back from a loss the last time out. And this thing was all about stifling second-half defense and Naz Reid with a huge, one of his best career games off the bench for the Wolves. We'll break it all down here on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. And it's a victory Friday. The Wolves came out with a big win in Dallas on Thursday night against a red-hot Dallas Mavericks team that had scored 120-plus in four straight, had won four straight games. The Wolves are coming off a loss a couple nights ago, and they dominated the second half of that game. We're going to break the whole thing down, the defense, the impressive role player performances, all that on the show here today. It is, in fact, the postgame podcast. We'll do that, plus individual studs and duds here at the end of the show. A big thank you here, first of all, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so setting the stage real quickly for this one, the Wolves came in, having lost the Pelicans the other night. Disappointing loss. I kind of chalked it up to Zion went crazy. The Wolves committed a bunch of fouls. It was a tightly called game. There were like 60 or actually 59 total free throws between the two teams. A little fluky. You just got beat, right? The Mavs had won four straight. They'd scored 120 plus each time that they won. One of the league's best offenses, one of the league's best three-point shooting teams. They were getting some guys back. Derek Jones Jr., and obviously still banged up. The Wolves had Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, and Jordan McLaughlin all listed as questionable for this game. McLaughlin and McDaniels both played in the Pelicans loss, but McDaniels came off the bench. Nickeil Alexander-Walker started, and Ant did not play. This time around, all three were active. McLaughlin just didn't play because he wasn't part of the rotation in this game. But Ant started, and Alexander-Walker started. First time the Wolves have had their preferred starting five in quite some time. Like almost 3 weeks, I believe. And, McDaniels looked a lot more comfortable. Well, we'll get more into that. McDaniels looked a lot more comfortable than he did on Monday night against the Pelicans, for sure, in this game. But it allowed Chris Finch to go back to what his preferred rotation is. And it also looked a little different. We'll talk a little bit about that. The bench guys who played, guys who didn't play as part of the rotation was interesting in this one. But all that to say, this was a challenge against a really good offensive team. And one of my concerns coming in is that Dallas is such a good three-point shooting team. And first of all, that's a concern because the Wolves have had some pretty good fortune. They have the third best opponent three-point shooting percentage against them. And by best, I mean like lowest, right? Third lowest opponent three-point shooting percentage against them, of any team in the league coming into the game. And I've talked about that extensively on the show. Yes, there's some luck involved, but there's also some skill, right? There's some intentionality to the types of threes that you're allowing your opponents to take. Contesting shots with length and closing out under control matters too. And also somebody has to have the best opponent three-point shooting percentage against them, right? Like it's not way out of whack. Continues to be good. They continue to have the league's best effective field goal percentage, but you face a team like Dallas that is such a good three-point shooting team. And you're worried about that first and foremost. And then secondarily, even though Dallas isn't a great offensive rebounding team, they're a bad rebounding team in general. Coming in, they were 22nd in offensive rebound rate. You still worry about the team that has the second highest three-point attempt rate in the entire league. Long shots equal long rebounds. I talked about this previewing the matchup on Thursday's show. And the Wolves still have a bit of a weakness. I know that the overall defensive rebound rate is trending in the right direction, but there's some garbage time stuff mixed in there. It's really been more middle of the pack in terms of how the Wolves have rebounded the ball on the defensive end of the floor. So I worry about second chance points. I worry about transition opportunities. I worry about with the pace that Dallas plays at, and obviously Luka drawing a ton of fouls. All those things were concerns. The Wolves did a great job in every one of those areas in this game. And it didn't look like it would start that way. Well, it didn't start that way. It didn't look like it would finish that way based on the way it started. Minnesota was down 17-2. Finch called a timeout when it was 13-2 to start this game. And it really, truly felt like it was going to be an absolute disaster. 17-2 after Luka made a 4-point play. McDaniels kind of poked him in the face after on the follow through of a 3-pointer from the top of the key from Luka. It was 17-2, like just over 3 minutes into the game. It looked like it was going to be an absolute disaster, but the Wolves, I mean, the Mavs have given up a ton of big leads. They just did it the other night. So, I mean, this is still first quarter. So this isn't even like a second half lead. This is so early in the game, but still the vibes were not good to start. They righted the ship and were only down 4 at the end of the first quarter, which was a shock. Like it didn't really even feel like it. It still felt like Dallas had a lot of momentum, but think about it. They were down 17-2. That means that the Wolves went on a, 24 to, am I doing this math? 24-13 run to close the quarter. We're down 4 at the end of the first. And like a lot of that was the bench. And early in the game, it was like Jaden McDaniels picked up a couple quick fouls. I think the one on Luka's face was his second. Gobert picked up his third foul like early in the second quarter and had to hit the bench early. The defense looked just a little bit slow, and Dallas, they didn't make a ton of threes early in this game. They only made 7 on the night, obviously, but that 4-point play, I think their first bucket of the game was a 3-pointer. Like it just kind of felt like this thing could snowball very quickly. But then the bench is what saved the day. And obviously now the bench is kind of buoyed. It's given a boost by Alexander Walker moving back to the bench, by Troy Brown Jr. continuing to play well, even though his minutes are obviously now shorter than they were before. And Chris Finch being allowed to play the bench the way he wants to, deploy his bench how he'd like to. And they were clearly empowered in this game. And in a game where Rudy, like second straight game, Rudy got into foul trouble, which is very unusual based on how he's played really for his career. But, especially this season for the Wolves, he hasn't been in a ton of foul trouble, but he was again in this one. And Naz Reid was fantastic, especially in the second quarter when the Wolves needed him to be. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, big second quarter. Both Naz and Na were huge in the second quarter. Troy Brown Jr. hit a big 3, I guess he hit a 2. His 3 was in the second half, but he had some big moments there in the second quarter. The Wolves completely righted the ship. We're actually up late in the second quarter, ended up being down 1 at halftime on a last-second bucket by Dallas to close out the half. But it felt like Minnesota had all the momentum at halftime in this game. Like just because of the way the bench played and how good they were in the second quarter. Third quarter, Karl-Anthony Towns shows up, ends up having a really great stat line. We'll talk more about him later, but a big third quarter for Cat, hit a couple of really tough kind of one-legged, tried to go Dirk-esque fadeaways. I think he had 3 of them in the game in the house that Dirk built, if you will. I don't think anyone calls it that, but maybe they do. I don't know. It would make sense. The bench continues to play well in the third quarter. Rudy controlled the paint, managed his foul troubles. We've seen him do so often this season, only ended up with 4 fouls in the game. And it was, again, you could actively see Dallas like Derek Lively got a couple touches in deep where normally, like a normal big would seal somebody near the restricted area, just turn around and dunk. And Lively got the ball and was in a position where against almost anybody, you try and score. And he was just like, nope, I'm throwing it back out. It was like semi-pro when Will Ferrell's in the post is just like, nope, I don't like it. Throw it back out. It didn't go back and forth exactly like that. But there were multiple times where Derek Lively had the ball in the post and was just like, I'm not doing this. I'm throwing it back out. That's the type of effect and impact that Rudy Gobert has. That's what happened in this game in the third quarter. And the swarming defense in general, the perimeter guys were awesome. Alexander Walker, Jaden McDaniels did enough on Luka. The Wolves tried both, a little bit of drop. They tried some playing at the level of the ball, of the screen, to try and contain the ball. And, it was a mixed bag. Luka had a good game overall. I mean, he turned it over, 8 times, I think? Yeah. But he had 39 and 13. He's 15 and 27 shooting, got to the line 7 times. Luka, there were a couple shots he hit, more than a couple, that were just nuts. It was almost like Zion the other night, the type of shots he was making. The Wolves are forcing these guys to shoot 10, 12 contested 10 or 12 footers, and they're all world players and they're making them. And in this case, nobody else came to the party besides Luka, right? Derek Lively had 15. Dante Exum, I guess, was efficient with 14, but like there wasn't anything else to scare the Wolves in this game. And Luka ended up turning it over enough too that that was also a big hindrance for Dallas. But the Wolves forced Luka to do what they wanted him to do, and he was good enough that Dallas hung around in this game for much of it. And then as the second quarter wore on, Dallas went cold. They got frustrated. The vibes were bad in the arena. Clearly, it was just seemed dead. And Dallas just kind of like they really mailed it in late. But credit the Wolves' swarming defense, contesting shots, jumping passing lanes, getting deflections, just being active. It's the reason why this is the league's best defense, and so impressive to see them do that against a really good offense. Like for the season coming in, Dallas was 4th in offensive rating at Basketball Reference. They were 8th in pace. I mentioned this earlier. They're number 2 in three-point attempt rate, number 1 in made threes per game, number 7 in percentage. They get to the line, especially Luka gets to the line a ton. I know Kyrie Irving didn't play, but this is a good offensive team, a very good offensive team. And the Wolves gave up 60 to them in the first half. Second half, 41 points. They end up shooting, 21%, I think, from outside there, 21.9%, 7 of 32. They hold the Dallas Mavericks, a team that is making 16, almost 16 and a half threes per game, to 7 made threes in this game. A really outstanding defensive performance from Minnesota. I want to get into a couple of, I'll do 3-ish key takeaways, and then we'll do individual studs and duds. That's what we'll do here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Dave. Finances can be so intimidating. That's why you need Dave. Dave can make managing your money so much easier with an interest-free extra cash advance, fee-free goal tracking, and easy ways to find a side hustle to make more money. Dave is the banking app that's leveling the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. It's part of Dave's extra cash account. Advance the money you need with no interest and then settle up later. Extra cash gives you more money to buy groceries, fill your tank, finally get your car repaired, or catch up on bills without having to wait for your next paycheck. You can even build credit when you settle up on time. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to make their finances easier. So if you're in a pinch, get the help you need by downloading Dave. Download Dave today at dave.com/LockedOnNBA. That's dave.com/LockedOnNBA. You could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. Download the Dave app now or go to dave.com/LockedOnNBA. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, let's talk key takeaways from this one. I talked about this a minute ago, but number one has to be the Timberwolves' second half defense. I mean, wow, like flying around. Kyle Anderson pickpocketed Luka Doncic at one point. Actually, so did I believe Ant did it as well. Somebody else did it late too. Naz getting involved defensively, and he's been solid defensively all year, but really good. To a person, the Timberwolves were so active defensively, and that's how you build the number one defense in the league. Is you're on a string, right? You're covering. You're like with what Dallas tries to do when you're guarding that pick and roll. Especially if you're playing at the level, you need to be able to be on a string, really. And actually, we saw this at one point. Like, it's like if they're doing pick and roll and you're playing at the level and there's a roller, somebody's got to tag the roller. Then you got to cover the corner, right? Because they're going to throw it to the corner. Got to X out and cover the slot, the whole thing, right? And Ant actually picked off a pass in exactly that. It was actually, I think it was in the first half. It wasn't the first half, but it was exactly that. The Wolves were switching up their coverage a little bit. They were playing at the level, and Luka drove to his right, tried to throw it to the weak side corner, right? Like the long way. And Ant was kind of like, a little, he happened to glance at just the right time in order to pick it off, but it was more or less like right past his face. He turned and caught it and went back the other way. The Wolves defended pick and roll really, really well. And yeah, I know Luka had 39. I know he was 15 to 27. He also turned it over 8 times and was really frustrated. Should have been like, I don't know, like easily could have gotten a second technical at the end of the game with how much he was whining. But I mean, I guess it's par for the course for Luka. But he was phenomenal. The Wolves just were so good. They took everyone else out of the game. And then they did well enough contesting threes. Tim Hardaway was 0 of 7 on threes. Derek Jones Jr., 1 of 6. Grant Williams, 1 of 7. So combined, those three guys were 2 of 20 from outside the arc. 2 of 20. That's not a recipe for winning if you're the Mavs. And like, they've been flamethrowing the last 4 or 5 games. Like Dante Exum had a crazy amount of points the other night. They beat the Lakers. Like, everybody's all about Dallas's offense, and they were due for a performance like this. But credit the Wolves for forcing them into it. Like, both things can be true, and they often are in the NBA, right? Like, there has to be some level of luck, of good fortune, but you can increase the probability that those things happen by playing well. And that's why I don't think the 3-point percentage thing is a complete fluke. The opponent 3-point percentage thing for the Wolves. I'm going to keep going back to that because you got to give credit for this team doing what they do defensively night in and night out. And that's what happened here. It was really impressive. Second takeaway is the Timberwolves absolutely controlled the glass in this game. Let's see, what was the margin? It was 45-34. They were plus 11 on the glass. In fact, here, I'll throw up the box score stats if you're watching on YouTube. The Wolves are a plus 11 on the glass in this game. And no, Dallas is not a good rebounding team. We talked about this on Thursday's show. They're bottom 5 in defensive rebound rate, bottom 3rd of the league in offensive rebound rate. But as I mentioned earlier, I was worried about long rebounds. I was worried about the Wolves just kind of occasionally getting lazy against some of these teams, even smaller teams that are potentially quicker than them, quicker to loose balls. And then long rebounds lead to offensive rebounds, which lead to open threes, right? Second chance points are often at the rim or threes. And long rebounds can lead to wide open threes. The Wolves did a really good job limiting those. For the game, Dallas only had 4 offensive rebounds for the entire game. That's crazy. The Wolves had 12, and they're not a really frequent offensive rebounding team either, right? So very, very impressive performance on the glass from the Wolves, and they needed it. Karl-Anthony Towns had 17 rebounds. Rudy had 12. Naz had 6. So this is actually kind of crazy. The Timberwolves had 45 rebounds as a team. Their 3 centers combined for 35 of their 45 rebounds. Nobody else had more than 2 rebounds, which is not really how you draw it up. And one of my biggest beefs with the Wolves last couple of years has been the non-bigs haven't been rebounding. Like, Cat's rebound rate slid a little last year, but he was hurt. Like, generally, he rebounds well. Rudy was fine last year, not as good as he usually is. But it was the Jalen Noels and the D'Angelo Russells and the Austin Rivers and guys that are, like, allergic to rebounding that didn't hold up their end of the bargain. It didn't matter in this game. Like, this was 35 of 45 rebounds by your 3 bigs. Like, all right, fine. I mean, those guys were really dominant on the glass. It was very impressive. And that actually leads me into my next takeaway. The Timberwolves bigs just dominated this game. Cat 21 and 17, Rudy 8 and 12, and didn't shoot the ball quite as well in this game. Actually, no, I take that back. He was 3 of 4. He was 2 of 6 at the line, but he just didn't get the ball as much in this game. But he also had 5 assists and 3 steals. Like, it was a good Rudy game too. That's why I say, like, the bigs collectively dominated this game. Naz had 27 and 6 plus 3 assists off the bench, 7 of 11 from outside the arc, a perfect 4 of 4 at the line. It was a plus 16 off the bench. The Wolves, 3 bigs together. I'm going to do this quick math. 56 points. 56 of the Wolves, 119 points were Naz, Rudy, and Cat. And of course, 48 of them were Cat and Naz together. And I already mentioned 35 of their 45 rebounds between the 3 of them. They also collectively had 10 assists, 4 steals in this game. Rudy only had 1 block. The Wolves as a team only blocked, 4 shots? Yeah, 4 shots in this game. But it was a strong defensive performance from the Wolves bigs, especially. Rudy controlled the paint. Cat controlled the glass. Cat was also efficient offensively. We'll talk more about him in studs and duds. And came on strong in the third quarter, and the Wolves really needed to put this thing away. But Naz' second quarter performance and then continuing that in the second half was huge. I mean, look at, like, Dallas. You're not scared of that front line, right? Like, you're just not. Like, Dwight Powell's not a part of their rotation really anymore. Derek Lively, good, like, fine, solid, but you're not scared of him. Grant Williams, fine, but he doesn't have the size of a big you'd be worried about. And, I mean, Grant Williams, by the way, played 36 minutes. Shot the ball 2 of 11, had 3 rebounds. He's their starting 4. I mean, nobody on the Mavs had more than 6 boards in this game. As I said earlier, they had a combined 4 offensive rebounds as a team. The Wolves absolutely controlled the paint. Their bigs were huge in this game. I mentioned McDaniel's looking a lot more comfortable. That's not a key takeaway. That's just kind of an observation that clearly knocked some rust off last time out. He's not going to be part of studs and duds, so I wanted to shout him out now. 11 points, 5 and 9 shooting, missed his 2 3-point attempts, but looked, I would say, spry going to the basket a little bit. I want to talk about Ant as well. I'll do that before studs and duds because I don't think he's going to hit either one of those categories. A weird Ant game, which I guess is why I'm waiting until now to talk about it. It's just an interesting game, and I actually thought he brought some value to this one, even though he shot the ball terribly. So let's talk about Ant here next. Then we'll talk individual studs and duds. That's all upcoming. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season now more than a quarter of the way over, you can continue picking combo projections across football and basketball. There's only like 4 more weeks. Not even. Yeah, 4 more weeks of NFL football regular season. But you can go across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. There's Saturday games this week, too, with college done except for bowl season. So Saturday NFL plus NBA action. The Wolves play Saturday night, so you can take Karl-Anthony Towns 3-pointers made plus, I don't know what the Saturday game is, but say it's Travis Kelce receptions. You could combine those two and say a 10.5-point combo. I'm going to take more than or less than that number. They also offer a reboot policy, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets hurt for football and basketball. If they get hurt in the first half and don't return in the second, your player will get rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform that has an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for that first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, let's close this thing out by talking Ant, and then we'll talk individual studs and duds. So Anthony Edwards in this game, just like last week against San Antonio, I think it was like last Wednesday, he had a terrible shooting night. And then a couple nights later, he, leaves the game after 3 minutes, clearly still injured, misses the game Monday. He's back now. And another bad shooting night, 3 of 19 from the floor. He only attempted 3 threes, which is odd. He missed all of them. Only 3 of 6 at the line where he's been good this year. But he finishes with 9 points, 11 assists, a couple of steals, and is a game high plus 20, or tied with Nickeil Alexander-Walker for a game high plus 20. I'm not about to give him a stud for this game because, like, at some point he was just trying to make a shot. Like, I that's what was happening. That wasn't great shot selection. He, by the way, had by far the most field goal attempts on the Wolves, 5 more field goal attempts than the next highest, which both Naz and Cat were 8 of 14 shooting. Ultra efficient. Ant, not so much, 3 of 19. 9 points and 19 shots is not how you draw it up any night of the week. But the 11 assists were by far a team high, and he had a couple of wow assists in this game. And the plus 20, I thought he was very good defensively. Second half, he D'd up Luka one-on-one a couple of times. Like, this wasn't one of those he shows up in the moments when everyone's watching defensively. I thought he played well defensively throughout, which I was impressed by, given that he was less than a week away from not being able to play 3 minutes in a game before being taken out with the hip, bothering him. So, I don't know. This was a good example of Ant providing value when he wasn't himself offensively. And he didn't used to do that. He only had 2 rebounds in 35 minutes. Fine. Like, the 11 assists, he turned it over 5 times. So that's why it was a very, the combination of all these things is probably a middle of the road impact. Like, the plus 20 is noisy, right? I don't like individual players single game plus minus, but it's worth pointing out when it's that drastic, right? Nobody else, only 2 guys had plus minuses above 16, and one of them's Ant. I thought he was good defensively. I thought he was good distributing the ball. I thought he mostly made good decisions other than some of those shot selection or shots he took late in the game. Just an interesting 8 game. But great to see him on the court, and hopefully he feels fine, feels well enough to play Saturday. They're going to need him to shoot the ball better to keep pace with the Pacers, as it were. They're incredible offense. All right. Now we get into studs and duds. Number one has to be Naz Reid. He was fantastic in this game. I'm going to throw up his stats here on YouTube. If you're watching there, 27 points, 6 boards, 3 assists for Naz, 8 of 14 shooting, 7 of 11 outside the arc. He had been shooting lights out, was a 50, 40, 90 guy as recently as 2 weeks ago, and then was like, I don't know, like 2 for his next. Well, actually, here, I'm going to see if I can pull it up. It was literally like 2 for his next 20 or something crazy from outside the arc. And then all of a sudden, he's lights out again. Yeah, so go back to just a couple weeks ago. He was 0 for 4 against Utah. He had a 1 for 7 and 0 for 5. And then he was 3 for 7 against New Orleans, now 7 of 11 in this game. For the month of December, he's still, with this performance, only shooting 28% from 3. So for the season, he's going to inch a lot closer, to getting back to that 40% mark. But just a fantastic masterclass performance being a backup big. I mean, you can't do any better than 27, 6, and 3 from your third center. And a plus 16, by the way, plus minus for Naz. I just thought he was fantastic in this game. And really, it was the timing of his second quarter performance and the way he carried that into the third quarter, given the Rudy foul trouble, given the Wolves' issues on both ends of the floor in the first half. I was very impressed with Naz's game, and he is the number one stud from this one for me. I'm also going to give one to Karl-Anthony Towns. His game was weird, too, in that it was relatively quiet. It was nearly a 20-20 game, like 21-17. You'd think it would be a louder 21-17, but it was really more that third quarter flurry and the 5 offensive rebounds. He only knocked down 1 3. It was 1 of 3 on threes in this game, 4 of 5 at the line, so he didn't get to the line a ton. It was just a balanced cat game. Not out of control, not in foul trouble. He had 1 personal foul in 31 minutes, which is like flabbergasting, right? Like, is that a word? Flabbergasting? I don't know. Shocking, right? Like, this was just a well-rounded cat game. I don't know what else to say about it. It was the offensive rebounds were impressive, and then the third quarter flurry where the Wolves also needed it there. Just a good Karl-Anthony Towns performance that they'll take every single night of the week. I mentioned Rudy; he was solid. I'm actually going to give my third stud though to Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I thought his help with McDaniels on Luka was huge. His shot making was timely. 13 points on 5 of 6 shooting, 3 of 4 outside the arc. Again, second quarter, which is where this game completely turned. And the Wolves bench was to think primarily Naz and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And he also, Alexander-Walker had a couple big buckets in the second half too, was a plus 20 in just 20 minutes of this game. That's how impactful he was. And again, noisy statistics, not even a real stat, but here it tells us something. He only played 20 minutes. The Wolves were 20 minutes better in those minutes that he played. He only had 1 rebound, only had 1 assist in 20 minutes. But the shot making was big. The defense was big. Combined with McDaniels, the Wolves did enough to frustrate Luka into 8 turnovers, and just kind of a frustrating night for Luka Doncic. So he'd be my third stud. If I had a fourth, it would be Rudy. He was strong. We talked about that already. But other role players were good too, like Mike Conley, 14 points, couple of big threes. Kyle Anderson, a good performance, albeit quiet. He's had a quiet season so far, but not very many glaring mistakes in this one like he's had at times this year. Troy Brown, 5 points, 15 minutes, nondescript. If you didn't watch this game, his 3-pointer was big. It was big. I don't remember exactly what the score was, but it came at the right moment in the second half. Had a really nice 15-minute stint. Last point here on the rotation. Oh, duds. I don't have any duds. No duds for this game. Nobody played poorly. Ant's shooting wasn't good, but he contributed in other areas. Everybody else shot around 50% for the field, and just like there was nobody that was bad in this game for the Wolves. Chris Finch's 9-man rotation did not include Shake Milton. I was kind of expecting him to go 10, but there was no Shake Milton and also no Jordan McLaughlin. Now, against the Pelicans the other night, there was no Ant, and he went with a 10-man rotation. This game, Ant comes back. He went 9-man rotation. So McLaughlin and Shake Milton, this is the first game of the season. Now, they both played garbage time, so Shake still has played in every single game. But those guys are out of the regular rotation now. It's going to depend on foul trouble, injuries, and potentially matchups. And like Troy Brown took that Shake spot. Now, there's not a backup point guard among them, right? I know the Wolves think Nickeil Alexander-Walker is like their quote-unquote backup point guard. And Conley only played 29 minutes in this game, which is fine, but you'd still like him to play less in a game you win by 18. They were able to steal some more rest for McDaniels, who I guess bruised his tailbone or something during the game. And of course, he's in game 2 back from the sprained ankle, so he only played 24 minutes. But If Chris Finch can find a way to limit Mike Conley's minutes a little bit and give some of those to McLaughlin, give some of those to potentially Shake Milton if he can figure some things out, I think the Wolves would be better off here in the long run if Conley can stay fresh. But rotation stuff we'll definitely keep an eye on. Next up, the Wolves have the Indiana Pacers. That's Saturday night, today's Friday's show, so we're not going to actually preview that matchup, which is kind of too bad because the Wolves will only face the Pacers, twice. But the Pacers still have the league's best offense. They have a crazy offensive rating of 123. Their defense has been marginally better lately, but it's actually 27th in defensive rating. So expect a high-scoring game. Expect fireworks at Target Center. I think the Wolves are wearing the old Shep jerseys too. So come on out to Target Center if you can and check it out. It's going to be a fun game. A lot of scoring, and hopefully the Wolves are, everybody's back on the floor for them. If you can't go to the game, though, make sure to listen to the hometown broadcast with our friend Alan Horton on Sirius XM on the SXM app. That's a 7 p.m. tip, I believe, on Saturday against the Pacers. Again, search Minnesota Timberwolves on the SXM app on Sirius XM to listen to the game. We'll have a live postcast at the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel, audio in this feed. If you missed the postcast on Thursday night, the audio is the episode before this. Jack Borman joined Luke Inman to talk Wolves Mavs. So the episode before this was that live recording from after the game. And then our next show here, besides the postcast over the weekend, which you'll find on this feed, I'll be back Monday. We'll talk about Saturday's game on Monday's show. We'll also preview Monday night as the Wolves continue this difficult stretch of games. So make sure you're following and subscribe to this show. A big thank you to those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, you can find it anywhere. That's YouTube. It's wherever you listen to podcasts. It's also on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.